Right, we're recording here with Will. How you doing, Will?
Doing good. How are you?
I'm doing excellent. I was checking out some of your stuff. You were deep into the polling for the 2024 election, and took a look at that. I will say on the record, okay. I published something August 30th to Twitter. I said I think Trump is going to win 59% of Hispanics. And people laughed at me
Mm-hmm.
and they said that's ridiculous. And I said, okay, you know what? He's going to be lucky to get 40% nationally, but in certain states, you never know. This is something that is possible. And everyone said it was that he'll never win minorities, he'll never win Hispanics. Republicans can't win Hispanics. And then we get this data out of Michigan, and I'm like, am I a prophet? Am I a
And
genius or something?
and Miami-Dade.
Well, Miami-Dade
I
was
think
actually, I think, a lot of people were saying it's the Cubans,
it
right?
was up
Because
for grabs.
Cubans are this special
Yeah.
demographic. They're not like other Hispanics.
No,
But as far as I know, there aren't a lot of Cubans up in Michigan.
no, not at all. And yeah, he made a lot of headway with Hispanics and the black vote and Muslims. Where he lost ground was with unmarried white women. I don't know if it's white women, but I know it's unmarried women versus married women. Married women were about a 50-50 split, and unmarried skewed heavily towards Kamala. And that was basically her only demographic that she, over-indexed on, so to speak. But the black and Hispanic vote, I would say, especially since the assassination attempts, the lawfare, whether that was warranted or not, I'm not a legal expert, but I think that humanized him in a lot of ways, and sort of brought him off this like billionaire pedestal to a lot of people, and like make no mistake, this election, especially the way the campaigns were run, it was more I've written about it a few times. It was a vibes election. It wasn't policy, heavy at all. It was really about optics.
Yeah, I mean, I knew a lot of Republicans who are thinking of voting Democrat when the indictments first came out. They said, I'm not voting for a felon. This is ridiculous. January 6th was a total disaster. We can't have a guy like that in the White House, totally disqualifying. But then there were all of these events which overshadowed January 6th. I mean, how often does a presidential candidate, a former president, get shot in the ear? I mean, I saw a lot of blue anon, people with their conspiracy theories, but I'm like, look, whatever people think, you can even believe it's fake, but still, it's a spectacle. It's something that really
Mm-hmm.
it almost relativizes or trivializes January 6th, and I say that as
Sure.
somebody who takes, I don't think people should be storming the cap, and it's like I think that's a serious riot and people should take it seriously. But when there was all this stuff about Stormy Daniels and the documents, and there was just too many things, if they had focused on one winning case, if they had said, this is our strongest case, we're just going to focus on this, and 24/7 documents, 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 and they
Yeah,
had just
they threw the kitchen sink at him, and it muddied the waters.
yeah, it was really interesting to see that strategy unfold, and every single aspect of it at the time, like procedurally, seemed to make sense. Like, okay, we'll just throw another trial on there, or what? Here's another
Mm-hmm.
indictment, or this'll kind of beef things up, or this'll. And I think the effect it had ultimately, ironically, was to force Trump to be much more conciliatory with donors,
Yeah.
because he had to go to them and say, "Look, I'm getting bankrupted with these
Mm-hmm.
lawsuits. I need money. What do you need from me?" And they said, "Well, we'd like deregulation, we'd like tax cuts, we'd like a pro-business policy, and we want more legal immigration, and we want green
Mm-hmm.
cards for, 2-year degrees, and things like that. And he was like, I don't have a choice. It's either I win the election or I go to jail and I'm bankrupted and my children are
But to be
blackballed.
sure, but to be fair, that was the platform that he had been running on since 2016. So, and I think that it gets to a really important point here that whereas Kamala Harris has flip-flopped on most issues other than abortion and some sort of social causes, um, she has gone fracking, on immigration, and her track record as a prosecutor and as an attorney general. um, she was hard on, sort of a hardliner on that, and then flips on that under the Biden administration, who really moved things in a progressive way until she had to run and sort of try to compromise and meet in the middle. And so people see these constant shifts, whereas I agree with your point, but I think, to be fair, we have to understand that what they were asking of him was no different than his original platform, and that the consistency and his authenticity, but they believed him that is what he stands for, that his belief system and his policy agenda align. And I don't think the American voters believed that of Kamala Harris. I didn't, at least.
I guess I was willing to give Kamala the benefit of the doubt. I actually had an inverted view of this. I think that when she ran, if you actually look at her track record in California as a prosecutor, she was not running as a bleeding heart liberal. She actually wrote a book about her time as a prosecutor. Yeah. And she said, a lot of these black people thought I was going to let them off the hook. And I don't give preferential treatment to someone because they're black. If you're a criminal, you need to be removed from the community. Then 2020 comes around, which is the height of BLM. And so she's trying to run to the left of everybody else. I mean, it's a big competition. And I think from my perspective, her genuine belief system is cynical, pragmatic, power hungry. I mean, she's a politician. She's going to say what she needs to say. And unfortunately, 2020, her run in 2020, it got her the vice presidency, but it set a precedent that when 2024 ran around and the vibes are totally different, people have no interest in BLM, people have no interest in transgender surgeries for undocumented migrant children. I mean, there's been a huge shift on these. What people recognize now in the aftermath of BLM is that there has been no significant reform. The only thing that's changed is a bunch of police officers retired and crime went up.
Yeah.
That's all that happened. Yeah. Black people didn't have a revolution. They didn't get reparations. Nothing, education to go out. I mean, nothing cool came out of BLM. So people are just generally trying to sweep that under the rug. Kamala Harris reminded them of where we were 4 years ago, which was kind of a bad time. I mean, there's COVID going on and all these things. Whereas Trump kind of did the opposite, reminded people of the stock market in from 2016 to 2019, reminded people of, I don't know, the fact that we defeated
minority
ISIS.
Unemployment. I mean, say what you will about his first administration, but minority unemployment, improved significantly under his policies, and economically until COVID. Things were really in a Goldilocks zone: low inflation, decreasing unemployment, and incremental gains. Look, yes, there were tax cuts for corporations across the board, and whether you believe in trickle-down economics or not is a different discussion. But for me, I was making, let's say, I think like 70 or 80,000 at the time. That was right when I joined the workforce, and my paycheck went up 15-20%, and just by virtue of my tax bracket. And so there really was relief to the middle class. I don't know if you consider that's a middle upper range of incomes, but people remember that. I remember that. Because you hear everything in the news. Okay, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act is is passed and everything, and then almost like maybe a month after, my paycheck went up by 50-20%. That's meaningful. I like that. It's like, okay. um,
Yeah,
and to your point, there weren't meaningful gains made. They sort of regressed on the BLM stuff, and as it turns out, the people running that organization weren't all that coalesced around, what their solutions were, or anything like that. So there weren't meaningful gains under the Biden administration, or through the vessel of these social causes. The results weren't there.
yeah. I mean, I was pro Kamala, so my case for her was CHIPS Act was great. Manufacturing jobs increased, infrastructure spending increased. These are all necessary things.
Those are all true things. Those are all
Right.
true.
Unfortunately, I think that the inflation was something that people viscerally they were not
Yep.
able to weigh things that seemed relatively intangible. And by the way, most of those manufacturing jobs went to Texas. They went to a state that wasn't going to vote for Biden. They wasn't going to vote
Yeah,
for
that's a good
Kamala.
point.
And so there's this
Well,
impression.
Texas.
Go ahead.
Sure. I mean, Texas is Texas. Yes, it went to Tennessee, Texas, and a few other red states. But yeah, go on.
Yeah.
Texas is sort of trending purple, but it's still
the
a red
problem
state. I mean,
with
obviously.
that is that Hispanic vote we talked about is
Mhm.
that as you know, if you had asked me 8 years ago, what's the Hispanic vote going to do? You know, eve of Donald Trump's election 2016, I would say Trump is going to alienate them. And by the way, I knew illegal immigrants who legally couldn't vote for Trump but were threatening to do so anyway. So I knew even back then, people are surprised by this because they've never hung out with these people. But Hispanics who are in the country illegally, don't want more Hispanics coming in the country illegally.
Right.
They want their personal family to come in through chain migration, but they're not interested in a mass open border because they're trying to escape those countries. They know the types of people who are going to come in illegally, and they're the special exception. So, you know, I would not have predicted this 8 years ago, but once we had the 2020 data and I saw the precedent and maybe it's vibes, and also, you know, some of the Latinx stuff, I just started to say, look, Texas, it used to be this Republican nightmare. It's going to go blue by 2028. It's certainly going to be purple. I started to feel that actually the Hispanics are countering the liberals moving to Austin. The California liberals who are going to Austin, it's the Hispanics who are doing the work to keep them in check and balance them out. So, you know, basically part of the problem with Biden is that a lot of those manufacturing jobs, which were originally lost from the Rust Belt, they didn't go back to the Rust Belt. They moved to the Sun Belt. They moved to Arizona, Tennessee, and Texas mainly, a few others. But it wasn't he wasn't able to concentrate those benefits in the states that he needed people to see results in. He wasn't able to translate and say, look, and basically it's a pay for play. I mean, it's bribery on some level. That's how politics works, unfortunately. He wasn't able to pull it off. I think it was good for the country as a whole, but you know, it didn't result in an electoral victory. And Kamala Harris, people didn't look at her, and her face doesn't scream infrastructure, manufacturing. Whereas actually, you look at Joe Biden, and it's like he's from Scranton, Pennsylvania, son of the working class. You know.
No, they ran. They sort of profiled him brilliantly in connecting with middle America, you know, build the economy from, you know, not from the top down, but from the middle out. I think that's what they were saying. And I think really where, look, aside from his mental deterioration, which can we please, you know, just accept that that's what was happening. Aside from that, I think during the administration, for every win that they had on the CHIPS Act and infrastructure and other things that they were able to accomplish, I don't think they did. They did a good enough job of marketing that, of letting the American people know that that what gains we are seeing in the economy despite inflation are attributable to meaningful policy. And another thing is on inflation, they had a huge opportunity to, and there's some truth to this, to sort of defer the blame onto the Federal Reserve, and I never heard any of that. But in economics, you learn that money supply is really the barometer for the value of a dollar, and quantitative easing, created this excess money supply, and it was pre-COVID, the Fed began to taper quantitative easing, which is just mass buying of bonds in the open market, which started in the wake of the financial crisis, and it was set to be tapered in 2017, 2018, I think, into 2019, and that then COVID happened, and then it was monetary policy went dovish again. Interest rates were lowered. The money printer, as they call it on Reddit or wherever, was turned back on. Quantitative easing was turned back on, and it created an environment ripe for inflation. And add on to that the supply chain bottlenecks. It was a perfect storm in a lot of ways, and not necessarily the fault of the Biden administration. And so I think my larger point is that they didn't do a good enough job of articulating to the public, separating themselves from their failures and taking, their successes.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting to see. I think it was, I'm trying to remember the year that you had those stickers at gas stations. I did that with a picture of Biden pointing to the gas prices. Well, gas prices are now at like, what, a 10-year low or something crazy. They're
not quite, but they're down.
I think that might be adjusted for inflation, but I mean, they're within a moderate, reasonable rate. And what Biden should have done is he should have said, I'm going to steal a Trump policy, drill baby drill. I'm going to open the reserves, plunge the price, and then I'm going to send out my supporters in a campaign, and I'm going to say you should put those stickers back up now because I did that. That would have been a very good, effective counter signal to a campaign that was ultimately hollow because when the prices went up, I believe it was due to the war in Ukraine, which, Joe Biden, there's a long chain of causality where you could say, oh, if he was tougher on Russia, et cetera, but, or if he just gave Ukraine away or something. But the idea that Joe Biden had bad economic policy and that led to higher gas prices is every president has to deal with that kind of thinking, but that's low information voters. They don't know about the Federal Reserve. They don't know how gas prices work. They don't know what OPEC is. So some of these things are just unavoidable. I think ultimately at the end of the day, the fact that Kamala Harris apparently, and I want to double check this, but not a single county did better than Biden over 4 years. I don't know if there
were some, but zero in Florida. Every single county in Florida moved further toward Trump. Trump made gains from 2020 to 2024.
Yeah, I mean, I think people were betting on whether there would be an 8-point margin in Florida. I think he handily won that 8-point margin. So, and I remember people were saying, well, maybe Florida could be a swing state again. Yeah, there were some real. I laid out a platform of what I think Democrats should do in 2028. I think a lot of that, unfortunately, um, by the time it's like you need time to implement policies. You need time to see the results of those policies. You need time to popularize those results. So a lot of these things really should have been done 4 years ago. At some point, a deadline passed, and Kamala was throwing things out there. Oh, we're gonna put a price cap on grocery, your food prices. It's
It's too
kind of
little,
little
too
too
late.
late. It's kind of like you're vice president right now. Why don't you put the cap on right now?
Yeah,
And I
yeah,
think
they
the
didn't have
reason
an answer to that question.
right, and the reason she didn't do it is because I don't think she was super serious about it. And it was just kind of something that was thrown out like no tax on tips or something. It's kind of easy to say
Hmm.
and alliterative. But,
Or 100% forgivable loans to black men. Did you
that
see
was
that?
that was an amazing failure where I looked through her policies because I was looking for I want to see some meat and potatoes working class policies
Hmm.
here, and
So did I.
it just kept popping up black and brown. Then it's like the dudes who are working the jobs that you're trying to give them the loans, like they didn't hear that. They didn't. And by the way, you don't. Honestly speaking, getting a variety of 5 points with a minority community electorally doesn't mean as much as gaining 1 point with the white majority. Even still, just because of the voting rates, it's skewed 70% white still. So
Well, yeah, and let's take Pennsylvania. Everything basically west of Philadelphia. That's really where the election is decided in Pennsylvania. It's those rural counties where they're predominantly white. They're 70, 80% white. Um, and and yeah, Trump or Biden in 2020 um, really handled that caucus, if you will, well, the white rural voter, because he was relatable. I think that he showed empathy for them, and I just don't think I don't think in the social media era where no matter where you're campaigning, no matter where the rally speech is, it's reaching people in every state. And so if you're saying one thing in one state and another in a different state, those those messaging tactics conflict. And I mean, we saw it with both in Harris's rhetoric on the campaign trail and through their ads. I mean, there was pro-Israel. So Michigan had a significant Muslim voter base that both sides were trying to court, and the Harris campaign ran pro you know pro Hamas ads in Michigan, and then in Pennsylvania, where there's a large Jewish voter base, quite the opposite, pro Israel ads there at the same time. And that's just I don't know. I think they threw together a campaign, a team quickly. I think everything was by the seat of their pants, and they made a lot of mistakes strategy wise. And maybe that gets into the bigger point of trying to roll someone out there for the presidential race that hasn't won a single primary vote and was swiftly defeated in 2019 with substantial backing.
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately it came down to super PAC money, and the fact that if they wanted to avoid the complications of election law, Kamala had to be at the top of the ticket. I think that in a, if that wasn't an issue, I think having
Yeah.
literally anybody, Tim Walz at the top of the ticket and Kamala Harris as the vice president.
Josh Shapiro.
The thing I did hear about Josh Shapiro, and I don't know too much about him, but I heard that there were some sexual assault allegations against him. Now, in
Oh.
comparison, Donald Trump, I mean, blows him out of the water. So I'm not calling balls and shots here, but I am saying that for the Democrat Party, for the base, especially as you said, winning white women as their core demographic for some reason, that was not part of the strategy, and so they sidelined Josh Shapiro, and they lost Muslims anyway. So, it was, like you said, worst of both worlds. They upset both sides. Somehow Trump won Muslims. I mean, that really wasn't on my bingo card.
Well, look, I mean, if we draw it back to what happened whenever Trump was in office, the Abraham Peace Accords was a big policy win, foreign policy win, and they remember a time before the Biden. Look, whether it makes sense or not, people associate what's going on under an administration and they attribute blame, and so yeah, I mean, I think that the Biden-Harris administration had ample time and opportunities to make Russia-Ukraine better before it got worse, to pick a side on the October 7 and the aftermath in the Middle East, and sort of stick with it. But I don't think they were pro-Israel enough to garner the Jewish vote, and they weren't pro-Hamas enough to garner the Muslim vote. I think the campaign wanted to have it all.
I guess one of my conclusions to this is that unless it's a shoo-in, like I'll give you an example. 2008, economy was in tatters, endless war. George Bush, uniquely unpopular, especially because he's associated with the evangelical movement. This is the height of new atheism. Like, there's a lot of cultural forces that are pushing against George Bush, economic forces, military. I mean, nothing is going right. I think some of the worst approval ratings of all time of like an outgoing president. And into the fray steps Barack Obama, who he's actually going against Hillary Clinton. Now, if Obama hadn't run in 2008, I think Hillary Clinton would have been president. I think she, at that time, she still had her kind of Southern Arkansas drawl going on. She was associated with Bill Clinton, who was very popular, who had won states like Arkansas and Kentucky, Tennessee, these states. She had a much greater appeal at that time. And I really think the Democrats actually could have ran anyone in 2008 and probably won. The problem is that Obama, through 8 years of governance, kind of spent a lot of the cultural capital that was built up during the Bush years. Things like Ferguson, Missouri, and that whole era of 2014, the midterms, the Tea Party. There was enough that had happened where, people had started to see by 2016, actually, maybe Bill Clinton's NAFTA deal wasn't so great. Maybe free trade wasn't so great. Maybe offshoring wasn't so great. And so she had, in those 8 years, shifted her positions and distanced herself from her husband and moved in what she thought was the direction of the party. And it turned out not to be the direction of the country. And as you've said, it's an electoral college. The swing states are where it's won. There's a particular demographic of voter, tends to be white, tends to be more working class, tends to be more low information, low propensity to vote. These are people who are disgruntled, they're left behind. I thought one of the greatest, Trump didn't invent this term, but he utilized the word globalist, and he utilized that word to mean someone who is open borders, free trade, endless war.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the three words. And it was like a trifecta. It was like the holy trinity of globalism, or the satanic trinity, however you look at it. And he was able to use that. And one of the reasons why I was bullish on Harris incorrectly was I thought he had moved away from that, and he had moved toward kind of a standard Mitt Romney Republican message on tax and things like that, and immigration. He had moved, you could say, toward the center on those issues. But as you said, a move toward the center for a Republican is seen as moderate and normal. Whereas for Harris, who was trying to kind of do the same thing and run to the center as well, she was frustrated by the fact that this was perceived as cynical and uncharacteristic of the party, not just of her as an individual, but of the party as a whole. Whereas Trump was kind of aligning himself with a party that he had kind of been in the Civil War with, and people saw that as a reconciliation. With Harris, it was like, okay, you're claiming that you're going against your party, but you're actually increasing that division within the party. So they seemed less united. The Palestine issue is a great example where the base was really fired up for Palestine with the campus protests. Biden left him hanging, and
It was an opportunity.
It was, yeah. I don't know. Again, on some of these things, war in Ukraine, war in the Middle East, gas prices, inflation. There's so much there where the Democrats weren't at the steering wheel. They didn't have the control over the situation, and I actually don't blame them for that, but it just is what it is. And the only option you have is you have to win so hard on the issues you do control, and you have to show that to the voters, and you have to overcompensate for all the bad stuff that's happened. Mm-hmm. They weren't able to do, I mean, that would have been difficult. So I really think looking ahead to 2028, I think that they have a very strong chance. I think a Republican Party without Trump at the head of the ticket, to me, looks very weak. I don't think DeSantis is good. He has this very strong pro-life record. Well, I think Vance has similar problems.
I was going to say it's to be determined how Vance's sort of favorability fares over the course of the next 4 years, because to me, it seems like he's the heir apparent of the, call it MAGA, but in general, a populist movement, where he's being courted by the Trump circle, brought into the family, so to speak. And, he's a sharp guy. And he really did a great job on the campaign trail of going in front of adversarial voices and having conversations. And, this really was a campaign of like who can dunk on who. And he dunked a few times on CNN anchors and what have you. So it's to be determined who's like the heir apparent of, but this is the direction of the Republican Party. And I think they accepted that, but even before 2020. That Trump was a figurehead, and that's the way it's going to be until he either serves 2 terms or becomes too old. It's just is what it is. And I wanted to touch on another point. It's like in 2016, I think both parties in different ways had this burgeoning populist movement, and Bernie Sanders is, equal but opposite populist. And I don't, they pulled the whole super delegate thing, which has since reformed during the 2016 primaries. And I know from a public perception standpoint, it seems like Bernie Sanders was another authentic, very authentic, more well-spoken than Trump, more articulate, but authentic politician. I feel like his supporters and his movement feels like they were circumvented, and so it's probably those same people who, a lot of them probably actually voted for Trump, ended up coalescing around the other populist movement. which, both populist movements were just born out of dissatisfaction with like you talked about, the big globalist problems that, or at least how they were perceived. But yeah, I think the Democrats have done a really bad job of aligning their party with the general tone and tenor of their electorate.
It seems to me that Democrats would rather lose an election as principled liberals than win an election as pragmatic centrists. And I have mixed feelings about RFK, but had Tulsi gone for a populist move and said, you know what, RFK is going to be the vice president. The vice president has no formal power. The vice president doesn't have the ability to sign bills or issue executive orders.
It's a trivial position.
I mean, it's essentially ceremonial position. But you think of how RFK appealed on the Joe Rogan podcast. I think he still got like 400,000 votes, even though he said, don't vote for me. So this is a guy who I think very easily, if he didn't join up with Trump, I think very easily could have captured 5% of the country. And when you think about the vote margins, especially, and I haven't looked at RFK state by state, but I mean, that's something to decipher. But I just think on the face of it, balancing out the ticket with Kamala, she's very establishment. She's perceived as woke. She's got this party baggage. And then RFK, he's like this loose cannon populist. He'll do anything. As opposed to Waltz, who initially I thought, okay, decent choice. And Waltz, his debate performance was so abysmal, such a turnoff. My personal favorability rankings, I was like, he's a guy who can give a speech, he can give a monologue, he's excited, enthusiastic. But he went up there with Vance, and he just stared at Vance with a look of fear on his face. And I thought, this is a major turnoff to voters. Generally the vice presidential debate, how decisive is that? But yeah, I think Democrats,
it mattered.
Democrats would.
It mattered because, yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, even if you could have shown them with internal polling and said, look, if we make RFK the vice president, we can win this thing. I think they would have said, no, we're gonna remain within, we're gonna color within the lines and lose rather than do something crazy and win, because what we care about is institutional control. They care about
no
academia. They care about CNN. They care about these long-standing institutions and making sure that they're aligned with those institutions, because they see that as the base of not just their power, but the people who
stability.
Yeah, but also the staffing, right? The people who make up the State Department. They have to. This is kind of the class of people. Whereas with the Republicans, you have like evangelical Christians who Trump has pandered to, and so he kind of weirdly actually. He's simultaneously moved for them, but at the same time, Vance was a Catholic. His wife was a Hindu. So there's kind of some weird triangulation going on where somehow Trump has outsmarted and tricked evangelicals into thinking Vivek Ramaswamy is a Christian or something. I don't know how he pulled that off, but it's an interesting triangulation.
Yeah, don't discount the fact that there was the "they're not welcome here" moment at one of the Harris rallies, and those were religious zealots, let's call them, who were kicked out of the rally and then went viral on social media telling their story. She missed the Al Davis dinner. That's what it's called, the Al Davis dinner, and then was ridiculed. And so those two things alone, I think, alienated Catholics from her side, and also I think over the past, let's say since COVID, there's been this general attitude among everyday Americans of, oh, we're just exhausted with the identity politics. Like, we want what's best for the country. And we know that both sides are trying to pander to me because I'm a Catholic or because I'm, a Muslim, but we don't, we understand that's how politics goes. We see through it. And so both sides are doing that, but maybe Trump did it better.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, this kind of exhaustion. Like, I think a lot of times when people say, we're exhausted with identity politics, it's typically framed as white people are tired of, being told they're racist. But I think the inverse you're suggesting is that blacks and Hispanics are tired of being pandered to. I'm actually not sure what Asians did in this election. My suspicion is that they were going to move to the left. I have yet to verify that. But
yeah, likewise, I don't know.
But yeah, I mean, it seems to me that maybe people underestimated the fact that there's differential rates of sexism going on. That you're kind of breaking into, or you're fracturing into the intersectionalism when you're relying upon black men or Hispanic men to vote for a woman. And actually, there's a weird thing where there was a controversy over her race that I think white people generally took as distasteful. Why are you criticizing someone's identity, that you're racist? But I think actually a lot of black people felt like, what, we are offended in the same way that Native American would be offended by Elizabeth Warren claiming to be Native American. They were like, this is stolen valor. You grew up in Montreal, Canada. What do you have to do with us? Which is funny because Barack Obama grew up in like Indonesia and Hawaii, which, there's barely any black people there.
But it's just charm and charisma. She lacks charm and charisma.
Yeah, I mean, so there was a kind of uncanny valley. People noticed this with her accent, which, as you've noted with Biden actually was great at code switching. He could be like, he could be in a more professional tone for a presidential speech, and then he'd do a rally and he'd be like, I'm just a working class kid from Scranton, like not exactly a Southern, but kind of a folksy.
Hey, look, folks.
Yeah. I mean, Obama actually did the same thing, even though, like, I don't think anyone talks like that in Hawaii or Indonesia. He was still able to authentically pass as a folksy guy, a charismatic guy. And, Kamala she, like you said, she tried to be all things to all people. She tried to be a liberal why-not. She tried to be from the hood. She tried to be, all sorts of different things. And everybody rejected it. Everybody said, we don't want half and half. We want someone who's fully unapologetically themselves. And that's Donald Trump.
What conviction?
So in a sense, I'm kind of saying that actually identity politics did win the election, just not in the way that Democrats wanted it to. I don't know what that means for...
Maybe it was a referendum on Democrats' flavor of identity politics, if you will.
Yeah, I absolutely think that, people are not going to stop. Like, we have poll numbers and we can ask blacks and Hispanics, how important is your racial identity? And I don't think it's going to become irrelevant or something like that. But the way that they express that identity, the way that they understand that identity in relation to the Democrat Party, I think that, look, civil rights was 60 years ago. People have a different perception of race in America now than they did at that time. Republicans have been trying forever. And I think, like, Trump actually found out if you want to win Hispanics, you have to speak to Hispanics in a language they understand. And if you like that, there was that comment about Puerto Rico, like, oh, Puerto Rico's an island full of trash. And all the Democrats thought they had just won the election because they said,
they thought so. Yeah.
Yeah. They said, well, identity politics, if you call Hispanics trash, or if you call Puerto Ricans trash, all Hispanics are going to freak out about that. But the truth is, you talk to a Mexican American, a Dominican American, a Cuban American, and you say, "Hey, what do you think about Puerto Rico?" They say, "It's trash."
It's probably trash, yeah.
so
Because it's not
so
my, yeah,
you know,
exactly.
so it's like you kind of have to understand that people have a sense of identity, but the white liberal projection of how identity functions in an intersectional way, there's something lost in translation for the real
It's almost like
experience.
sub-monolithism. Like sub-monolithism, where like, okay, we have these six identities: Black, Hispanic, Asian, white, etc. All the Hispanics are the same. There's nuance there, like you said about Cubans, how they have their enclave there. They are a culture unto themselves, and they have a history of coming from Cuba, through Miami. Um, and so like there's nuance there, and I don't. To your point, I hadn't thought of this, but I don't think they appreciate being grouped together with, let's say, Puerto Ricans or
Yeah,
Dominicans.
and there's a divide within Hispanics. Like we shouldn't overstate things. Still, overall, the majority of Hispanics are Democrats, but the term Latinx was so polarizing because you're appealing to a very small number of Hispanics. You're alienating a much larger segment, and
Mm-hmm.
it was, I think if Democrats had run. I'm trying to think of this Mexican comedian, George Lopez. If they were like, you know what, we're
Mm-hmm.
running George Lopez for president, and he was making jokes about how like, hey, Donald Trump, if you're going to build a wall, you better not leave out any construction materials because we might come by and steal it. Now, that's a joke that's going to get laughs among Hispanics, whereas white liberals are going to freak out and say, no, you're going to ruin the, and it's like they're not able to put their, frankly, there is a white liberal culture in this country which, I mean, like,
It lacks humor.
they're extremely puritanical. They're
Yeah.
very they have their own concept of what is sacred and not sacred, and
Mm-hmm.
they have a set of rules. It's very anal retentive. It's very striver. It's very bourgeois, and they're not able to kind of slum it with in the way that Donald Trump can authentically say like, I'm a boss. There are all these really funny things that look. People were making fun of it, and I'm not into Donald Trump rap. I don't, little whoever they are. I don't even know the names of these people. But you saw them, these guys with the grills and the face tattoos and the MAGA hats, and that's not selling me on Trump. That's not like for me. But honestly, I think there probably were younger voters, Black Hispanic voters who look at that and say, you know what? That's the kind of pandering I do like. I don't want to be made into this fragile little, oh, you can
Right.
never offend these people. It's like, no, come out and give me a fist bump and like speak to me in a language I can understand and that I respect. So I
Mm-hmm.
think those are some of the big meta narratives in the culture that affected the election. We could talk. We could, and people are doing this. Go ahead.
Just one more point on the election. I think, in retrospect, I think one of the major tipping points is going to be that people are going to see as a tipping point is Joe Rogan's endorsement, and Kamala Harris's opportunity to go on the show, do a full 3 hours, reveal herself to the tens of millions of young male voters who watch that show religiously almost. Trump went on there, did 3 hours. JD Vance went on there, did 3 hours, revealed the human behind uncloaked themselves, so to speak, and then Rogan endorsed him the night before the election, and I don't think that was insignificant.
Yeah, I wasn't aware that he endorsed him. I don't even think it matters because, like you said, it's just about presence. And again, it's about getting on people's level. People don't want to feel like they're being talked down to by politicians.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, Kamala Harris, like Tim Walz's wife, who I don't even know her name, but she would say, now I'm going to put on my teacher glasses and I'm going to nag you, as if she was making a joke out of that. But no one's laughing at that. No one is like, oh, I mean, maybe there's a small percentage of women, but the voter, I mean, she already has those women. She doesn't need to pander to those women. What she needs to pander to is say, look, I'm just like you. I'm a red-blooded American just like you. And like, I think she
But there
really
needs to be a conversational component to it. And there wasn't. Those attempts at pandering in that manner of like humanizing herself, they didn't land because there wasn't a human conversation. They were photo ops, and they seemed preordained, pre-canned. Whereas, whenever Rogan's in a unique podcast session in that there's nobody else in the room. It's just him, a table, and his guest, and there's no script. They go at it in person, and nothing's off the table. And so I think she had a huge opportunity to be authentic, in sort of the ninth inning of the campaign, and she wouldn't do it.
it's so difficult because I like Hillary Clinton, but if you catch Hillary Clinton in her most authentic state, most men are gonna say she's a bitch. She's a boss bitch. She likes power. She likes to order people around, and the types of voters who listen to Joe Rogan in general. I mean, if you look at the gender of his guests, most of his guests are men. That's not an accident. It's like these guys want to hear guys talk, and if there's a woman talking, it's like, shut up and make me a sandwich. Maybe not explicitly, maybe not consciously,
Yeah, no.
but subconsciously, I think
undertones
there's
of
that
that.
cultural context. And so I just don't think Kamala didn't have the ability to reach those people pretty much no matter what. I think if she attempted it, it would have come off as insincere anyway. I don't think she has the ability to say, like, look, I like throwing people in jail. I'm running because I want to be president. What do I need to say? This is the authentic me. What do you want from me? Like, that's never going to happen. And it is what it is. Like, it's a tough world out there. There are many women who are like that, who work in the private sector, who do quite well for themselves. Carly Fiorina ran for the Republican primary, got absolutely crushed, but she was like, look, I'm a corporate woman, and this is my life, and this is what I do. And it's like, okay, you might not win an election, but it doesn't mean that, there's not a place for you in America. And it's just like, Kamala Harris, she was able to do the VP. I mean, she was able to win on a Biden ticket. Honestly, I mean, look, at some point, I just think that by switching Biden out for Kamala, the Democrats shot themselves in the foot, because
100%.
what they did is they said, we've been lying to you about Biden, and we're now admitting that.
But they didn't really admit it.
Yeah, again, it was one of these
just
worst
kind
of both worlds, where we're not going to admit it, but we're basically admitting it. So we've been lying to you about Biden. Also, we're not going to do a primary. We're just going to install her. And also, like, we're basically going to show you that this wasn't an accident. Because if they had ran with Biden all the way through and Biden lost, they could have said, shucks, we just didn't know he had this health problem. It couldn't be avoided, and we're loyal Democrats, and we don't switch people out like that. He won the primary, and so it is what it is. Better luck next time. We'll get him next time. But by trying to win the election, by not just realizing, okay, you know what, we lost. It's just one election. We'll get over it. We'll get him next time. By switching out Kamala, I think that did damage. It did damage for 2028, because it created this narrative. It reinforced an existing narrative that this is a party of appointments and not primaries. This is a party of elites and not common people, and they just see that as totally undemocratic.
100%. What it would have taken is, in the wake of Biden, performing terribly on the debate stage against Trump. In the wake of that, internally accepting we're fucked. But nonetheless, this is our candidate. He won the primary. But again, I think to your point, for 2028, they would have been more well positioned to turn over a new page. But now the trust in the institution that is the DNC is heavily diminished.
Yeah, I mean, the narrative.
And so I think they're going to have to do an about face.
I think
as a party,
if they had ran with Biden, you know what? Put Biden on Joe Rogan. It would have been funny. You know what? You talk about humanizing. It would have humanized Biden. He's an old guy. He's senile. I'm not making the case that Biden would have won the election. I'm just saying that it would have left a better taste in people's mouths to say, you know what? Joe Biden represents an era of Democratic politics. We salute him. We salute his service. And we're going to let him go into the night honorably. That's what you do. It's like you let people retire. He gave that speech.
Because he got the delegates.
He had an awesome speech. The first speech he gave after his failure at the debate, he went out there and he said, you know what? I had a tough night at the debate. I have a stutter. You know what? Maybe I'm not as sharp as I used to be. But you know what? What I was taught by my father is when you fall down, you get back up again. And that's
humanizing.
That was humanizing. So it's not an argument to say that Biden would have won, but it's an argument to say that people would have respected the Democrat Party for kind of being loyal to the old white guy. And then it would have been much easier in 2028 to say, you know what, we're going to put forth a successor to Joe Biden who's obviously going to be younger, but it's going to be a continuation. Like, remember Biden? It wasn't that bad. I mean, who knows what's going to happen in the next 4 years? Is Trump actually going to end the war in Ukraine? Is he actually going to end the war in the Middle East? If he does, maybe Republicans win. But if he doesn't, if things get worse, if it's like a Vietnam-style situation, then, okay,
look,
it's in play in 2028.
The ball is and 2026. I mean, the first 2 years of his term, the ball is entirely in his court because they won the Senate. It's looking like they're going to take control of the House, and they have the Supreme Court. So it's like whatever policy platform you want to implement, it's game, and so yeah, 2026. I think if Trump doesn't deliver on the big things, it's like inflation, which has come down, but not enough. It's still not to the 2% target, and there have been signs of a recent reinvigoration, if you will. Immigration, what does that really look like? Are they going to deport millions of people that came here illegally? That might be messy. It would be. That's going to be a tough thing to deliver on. And then foreign policy, which there's Russia, Ukraine. I think it's going to be interesting to see how he handles his relationship with Putin. I think soon in during his presidency, he's going to get people to the table. That's kind of what he's good at. Whether you agree with, the deals that he has made in the past, whether, there were positives or negatives, he's good at getting people to the table and cozying up to other authoritarian people, leaders. So what that looks like, is going to be a big determining factor. And then additionally, his relationship with Netanyahu, which is a really strong relationship. I think that I hope I'm not like a blind supporter of Trump. I voted for him, and I hope that he's the better answer to handling those issues and getting all parties to the table to work it out in one way or another. I mean, the devil's in the details for me, and I'm not a foreign policy expert. I'm not a legal expert. I know economics very well, but I also know human relationships well, and he does have those two key relationships. And if he's able to put people around him in the State Department that are really effective, I think there's a great opportunity there. So we'll see.
I want to ask you about the economy specifically with regards to AI. This is something that I've been worried about is an AI bubble. We had a tech bubble. We've had two tech bubbles, actually. We had the dot-com bubble in early 2000, 2001. And then we had, I would say, the post-COVID bubble where, you had tech stocks going down 70%. Some of them have rebounded since then because of AI. So it's kind of this perfect storm where initially you had, tech was going up because of COVID. Okay, everyone's going to be inside. We're all on the computer. Everything's Zoom. Then it crashes because we all come out of that and, it's overinflated, it's overvalued. But then now we have AI. And so every company, Microsoft, Facebook, Google, they're all into AI. And everyone thinks AI is going to save the world. And there's a track record of investors overhyping these things. In fact, basically scamming people on these things. It's not to say that the internet wasn't real or COVID wasn't real or AI isn't real, but that there's overvaluation and there's going to be a correction. The question is, does that correction happen in the next 4 years? If it does, what does it look like? How does it affect Trump and 2026 and the next presidential election?
Mm-hmm. A few things on that. In the sort of COVID tech bubble that you're talking about is very speculative. It was a function of several things. Yes, there were business tailwinds for, let's say, Zoom or DocuSign or stocks like that, that, benefited to an extreme degree, quickly, based on a quick change in the environment. And so that was like the initial pop, if you will. What sustained that bubble, if we were calling it a bubble, what sustained it was the easy monetary policy, low interest rates, cheap money, and which is a breeding ground for speculation in financial markets. It always has been, it always will be. There was, a bubble happening in private markets and venture capital where these big institutional investors and, venture capital investors were able to borrow at 1.5% or lower and funnel all this money into the capital markets and fund these startups that really didn't have prospects of sustaining themselves other than just continuing to get the next round of funding. They were burning cash, and that came to a halt whenever the Federal Reserve began to raise interest rates, and rightfully so, because something needed to be done about inflation, and that's it all sets at the price of growth. With AI, I think that right now what we're seeing is the early adoption stage where it's not quite plug and play. There's more investment that needs to happen right now in order to adopt AI within business processes and within current workflows. And a lot of this is like tech and finance and like white collar um, industries. Right now, I don't think that jobs are at risk. In fact, I think there are probably more jobs that are opening up for, let's call it, for people to liaise between uh, business systems and AI itself. Um, and also the product itself, AI, isn't quite there yet. There's this example of like Claude is one of the AIs that where it can sort of like iterate with itself and go back and forth solving problems. But there are examples where it sort of got tired of doing that and then started like Googling Yellowstone images and things like that. Like it still has hallucinations. It's not there yet. And so that's why there needs to be a human component to it, sort of marrying the two for now. I would say probably 2 to 4 years from now is when you'll begin to see once AI is implemented, you'll begin to see it replace jobs earnestly and materially. At that point, what the bottleneck will be is the cost of it. And the idea is that over the next 2 years, probably the cost of running AI is going to go down, as with any emerging innovation, TVs, semiconductor chips. You need a lot of server space, a lot of computational power in order to run these things, and so the cost is it's really not like the economics don't make a lot of sense right now for companies to be bringing on AI. It's more, it's not an immediate tailwind to profitability, but people are looking 5-10 years down the road. A huge bottleneck that a lot of people aren't considering is is how much it's going to be, is how taxing it will be to the energy infrastructure. We've seen it with Bitcoin. I mean, I think, Bitcoin mining in itself is like the equivalent of the energy needs of like, a G10 country. And similarly, AI is going to really, unless we build out our energy infrastructure with probably nuclear capacity, then it's going to bust at the seams. And similarly, with electronic vehicles, it's like currently it's not all that great for the environment to be building out all this electronic vehicle infrastructure, because the charging stations draw on electricity from plants that are using natural gas and fossil fuels to actually generate that energy. And so I think that like there actually at some point will be a strong connection between building out nuclear infrastructure capacity and the ability to lower the cost of AI. Because if the energy capacity isn't built out, then the cost of using AI won't go down. You understand? Because there, you hit 100% of capacity. If the demand is still there, then you need to charge a higher price to make the two meet. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I was just looking at some data on nuclear versus solar, and this is probably optimistic, but I think there's a case to be made that For a number of reasons, solar is probably a better play than nuclear. Um, we're in a good position geographically as Americans to take advantage of it. It's cheap to do incrementally, whereas nuclear you got to do all at once. Environmentally, uh, basically because Democrats are so pro solar, they kind of give it a pass in terms of solar farms, whereas nuclear, there's still a lot of resistance from the EPA. So I think there's regulatory reasons, and just ease of, it's easy to have a 1% increase in solar over the next year just by people marginally buying more panels, whereas a 1% increase in nuclear, you have to build an entirely new plant. So just in terms of coordination, centralization, anytime you're doing a big project, infrastructure project, you're going to have government come in, slowing it down, making it more expensive. That's just the nature of the beast. So I guess I'm more bullish on solar. I'm still, for environmental reasons, I don't like the lithium batteries. People say we're going to move to a salt battery. That technology, I mean, listen, I'll believe the salt batteries when I see the cold fusion reactors and all the rest of it. As far as I'm concerned, if it's not on the market, it doesn't exist. And, I'm not betting on things that don't exist. I'm not a risky better like that. But I agree with you that, there's some indication that AI is going to demand more energy. I guess the question is, the way I see it is almost as a 3-act play. And I don't know what the order of the acts is, but the first act I would say is there is, or maybe it's more than 3 acts, but the cycle looks something like this. You have an AI boom. People get excited. It's the new technology. Stock prices go up. There's optimism. There's increased consumer confidence. Then there's a downturn. That downturn could come in one of 2 ways. Number one, it could be AI is so successful that it causes major disruptions in the job market. You said overall AI is going to provide more jobs. I think that's true. But the question is,
in the near term,
right? The question is, who's losing the jobs and who's gaining the jobs? Especially with Trump talking about legal immigration, you could have a situation where programmers are getting fired and they're being replaced with people who are not good coders, but they can write AI prompts from overseas who have 2-year degrees. And I know a lot of guys who got computer science degrees, and that for them, that's, I mean, you could say, well, the economy's benefiting overall, just switch an industry. It's like, well, I put 4 years of my life into this thing. I spent all this time, learning C++ or whatever. And now you're telling me my skills can be replaced with an AI and some guy who does the prompt all day for half the amount of money. I think that is potentially disruptive, not to the overall economy, but in the same way that the Rust Belt lost manufacturing, and that produced a group of people who are economically dissatisfied, even as overall GDP goes up. I think you could see something where white-collar workers, people who work in call centers, who pick up the phone all day and say, hey, I'm calling on behalf of the collections, whatever. If that's all replaced with AI, you're going to see people at call centers, programmers, white-collar people being targeted. How they react to that, how they interpret that politically is one thing. The other thing is, okay, so you have the AI boom, you have maybe the AI kind of job shifting, and then you have an AI bust where we realize we've kind of overshot with our investments. A lot of these things look great on paper. And one of the ways that could be set off is with a major AI failure. Say people have talked about air traffic control. Air traffic controllers are paid a lot of money to make sure planes don't crash into each other. If they switch over to an AI system or an AI-assisted system, and there's a flaw with that system, and by the way, we've seen a lot of problems at Boeing with mechanics and all sorts of things, but if we see some kind of problem on that scale where there's a plane that explodes, falls out of the sky, whatever, I mean, God forbid another 9/11, but if there's a significant problem, that could really be a trigger event that makes people wake up and realize this technology isn't where we thought it would be. It has flaws. We overestimated. There's going to be a correction that overshoots on the corrective side. And is that then going to, trigger other hidden problems in the economy? The housing market, I believe, is still inflated. You look at the Case-Shiller. It's not. It never corrected. I mean, we've had this build up since 2012, really, and it's way above what the index says it should be, and it's still high. I mean, when is that going to come down? What's going to trigger that? So my question is, can AI in itself doesn't cause a recession, but can it be a triggering point for other weaknesses in the economy that then lead to a kind of repeat maybe of 2020, 2022, maybe something where it's not officially a recession, but politically, the way people interpret that is, hey, as far as I'm concerned, this is a recession, and I'm going to vote accordingly.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a good point. And to my point about there being sort of a catalyst, there were structural problems in 2021 and into 2022 that caused the economy to go into a recession. Inflation, and sort of like the inflated value of asset prices. And then there was a catalyst, which was, in a lot of cases, the Fed raising interest rates and money becoming more expensive. In this case, you're talking about, so underlying structural issues would be, I mean, the like energy infrastructure and having enough power, the displacement of jobs, and then getting to a point where there's a reliance on it only to have a huge mishap, and then people are and we saw this in autonomous vehicles, right? To an extent. I mean, the Tesla mishaps, Waymo has like divested a lot of their resources that they've put into that, and they still don't have a viable product, really. It's an interesting thing. I don't know if that's going to be the catalyst, or if that's going to, to your example of like a switchboard operator, or an air traffic controller, which 30 years prior would have been the equivalent of a switchboard operator or something to that effect, being a big headline risk. And then the structural problems underneath are, it's still expensive, and we still don't have, the infrastructure build out that is necessary to continue to invest in this. And so there's a divestiture across the board by companies, and it's considered a, sort of a sunk cost. That's a pretty bad case scenario there. And it brings me back to my point. And I did want to make this point on nuclear, that there are innovations happening, and like a good amount of investment happening with these small modular reactors, which are like much lower cost build outs. And there are some being built out, but we have these preconceived notions of all the accidents that have happened. And, was it 3 Mile Island, and why am I blanking on the one in Eastern Europe? But yeah, I think on the regulatory side, Trump has said some things about being pro-nuclear on the campaign trail. Mix that with like this deregulatory assault that they've been talking about. I don't know if that comes to fruition, but if the regulatory hurdles are removed for nuclear, I think that will be a huge spot of growth in the economy, and sort of a like it'll be a point of relief for industries like autonomous vehicles or electric vehicles, like AI, these power intensive industries, I think that infrastructure build out, which in my opinion will require like to have this sort of boom sustainably, it's going to require a nonlinear uh, path of growth for the energy infrastructure for power capacity, basically. What the catalyst would be for, I guess I'll sum. I'm sort of going on tangents here. There needs to be structural issues underneath the surface, and then sort of a top line catalyst. The structural issues, I think, are energy infrastructure. The top line catalyst, I think, your suggestion of sort of like major headline risks of like AI mishaps in important situations where like human loss of life is the outcome. I think those are real like inflection points, like we've seen with we heard like probably 5-6 years ago that within a few years you're going to see a lot of automatically auto driven car EVs everywhere, and we just haven't seen that because of regulatory reasons and people not really wanting to. Yeah, it's the headline risk.
Yeah, we're coming to the end of our hour here, so we're going to have to wrap it up, but I do want to give you last word, final thoughts, conclusions, anything you want to throw in there, anybody you want to shout out, projects you're working on. I'll give you the floor.
Yeah, I would say just draw it back to the election. I think everybody, first of all, I think that Republicans and anybody on the right, MAGA, needs to handle this with grace. It's not a time to, dance on the wall, as it were. And I think that it's a strong opportunity for policy to be implemented with the alignment of the two, both the House of Representatives, the Senate, and the White House. I hope that they're well intended. I also hope that the left is able to step away from this this hysterical approach to what who's in power and what the people have decided. And I do hope that my hope going into the election was that there was going to be a decisive victory so that everyone could coalesce around something. And it starts with the media. It starts at the top of the DNC. I think it's time to turn over a new page and ditch this, vitriol that has existed for the last decade.
Well, excellent. I really enjoyed this roundup. I'm sure people can hear about the election from a number of places, but I hope we added some measured nuance and careful thinking to this. Enjoyed your expertise on these topics, and hopefully hopefully there's no disasters that need commenting on, but if there are and they pertain to the realm of economics, I know who to call, so we'll be in touch.
Yeah, great. Thanks so much for having me on.
All right, thanks, Will. Talk to you later.
Okay.
Bye-bye. All right. Please like, please comment, please restack. That is the election roundup that you didn't ask for. Nobody asked for it, but I did it anyway. I did it anyway because I love you and I care about you and I just want to give you a hug. No, I mean, I'm sure a lot of people will find that to be a little bit technical. I think especially after we got into nuclear. I wasn't planning to get into nuclear power. We got into nuclear power. And I'm basically anti-nuclear power. I haven't done the essay on it, but I'm basically against nuclear power. I think it is, it's great for submarines. it doesn't make sense. Like they say, oh, it's infinite energy. Okay. If a nuclear, it's centralization. Okay. Centralization. It's a national security risk. I'm talking about there's a nuclear power plant in Ukraine that's been a problem. I'm not saying we're going to war. I'm just saying centralizing America's infrastructure or energy infrastructure is a national security risk. It may be a doomsday risk. It may be a once in a million years risk. It's still a risk. It's also an environmental problem because it destroys, if you put a nuclear power plant on a river, on a lake, if you put it anywhere, kills all the fish. So if you care about fish, nuclear power kills all the fish because it takes millions of gallons of water to cool these things. So all the water gets pulled in, all the fish die, the water gets expelled. It's basically sterile distilled water at that point. People don't know how nuclear power works. They talk about these salt fusion reactors, whatever, like, oh, okay, if it comes out, I'll support it. But right now, and by the way, nuclear, it's not going to drive your car. I'm sorry. Electric vehicles they're not so hot. We need hydrocarbons. We need oil and gas. It's cleaner. It's more environmentally friendly. Lithium batteries are bad. I'm not anti-nuclear if someone wants to build a plant. I'm just saying there's a lot of other options. I don't know. I'd like to talk with somebody who's anti-nuclear for pragmatic reasons, and not for the idea, oh, it's going to blow up and give us radiation poisoning. No. Even if you construct a nuclear power plant, which would never give anyone radiation poisoning ever, that's not the problem. The problem is a terrorist can blow up your nuclear power plant because it's a centralized piece of infrastructure. A solar farm is less centralized. An oil field is like, you can bomb an oil field and have it up and again and running. You can't bomb, natural disasters. There's all sorts of risks. Personnel problems. You can't mess up a solar field. You can't mess up, you can mess up an oil. We had the deep water. We have oil spills. But I'm saying, like, it's much harder. It's really easy to mess up nuclear power. South Africa was going to go on nuclear power. It's not looking hot in South Africa. I don't like the idea of centralizing our energy infrastructure in something that's highly technical, highly centralized, highly sensitive to sabotage, cyber warfare. Look, if you do a cyber attack on a solar panel, whoop-de-doo. You do a cyber attack on an oil field, whoop-de-doo. I don't like wind farms, but you get the point. You do a cyber attack on a nuclear power plant, you have a problem. You have a meltdown. And again, I'm not talking about irradiation. I'm talking about function. They're very easy to disable. They're very hard to build. They're very fragile. They're very delicate in terms of the software, hardware, expertise. Takes a lot to put, So I'm not bullish on nuclear. I think we should drill for oil. I think we should. I wish we would do things other than frack because it poisons the water supply. But there's alternatives to nuclear. Anyways, guys, that's it. I got to get out of here. Take care. I'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.